Alienated from the grandchildren. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. I came across a piece of correspondence in the Times newspaper, which gave me various considerations for utilizing it as an example linked to narcissism and to provide further observations and advice with regard to people who might find themselves in a similar situation. One thing that I commonly come across is a situation where I am consulted by a grandparent, or at least a parent, who is concerned about the behaviour of their child or their son or daughter-in-law, and they suspect that they might be a narcissist. There are instances where I have been consulted by mother, father, brother and sister who are concerned about their brother, for instance, who they believe has fallen in with a female narcissist, and of course vice versa, which has created problems with regard to what was once a close family, and further, in terms of restricting access to seeing grandchildren. In some instances, there is the alienation of the grandchildren, whereby the grandparents and uncles and aunts don't get to see the grandchildren, nephews and nieces because of the behaviour of the narcissist. As you know, it is common for a narcissist to control the intimate partner primary source by alienating them from friends and family, thus making them easier to control. By ensuring that their support systems are removed, that person becomes all the more reliant upon the narcissist, meaning that they then become that person's world. It also, as part of that, is often the case that any children that occur between the narcissist and their intimate partner primary source are similarly kept away from uncles, aunts, grandmother and grandfather. The children might be used as bargaining chips or are simply kept away, alienated from the grandparents as part of the narcissist's control over the intimate partner primary source and over the children themselves. I'm going to talk about the things that can be done in those situations, but first I'm going to take you to the letter that has been written by a concerned grandmother. She writes, "My grown-up daughter has a professional job, is married to a lovely man, and has 2 adorable children. She was privately educated, taken around the world, and shown love and support in abundance. She has always, however, found it hard to make friends and communicate and maintain relationships. She is envious of her brother and has no relationship with him. Whenever we see her, she has these emotional outbursts, mainly directed towards her father over old petty grievances. She seems intent on punishing us and forgetting all the good things in her childhood. When she was young, we took her to the GP, who referred us to a therapist who asked us why we were letting a child control our lives. That didn't help us at all. I am concerned that despite her upbringing, she is very much like my mother-in-law, and to some extent her father. My mother-in-law was cold, unloving, ungrateful, reclusive, and not family-orientated at all. My husband also lacks empathy and is very self-absorbed. I wonder if they are on the autism spectrum. We have been estranged from our daughter for some months, and have not seen our grandchildren, since she came to stay and yet again got into a rage with us. After these rages, she will weaponize the children, which is what she has done now. My husband's health is not good, but she seems incapable of showing him any love or kindness. She talks about me supporting her, yet does not even call me to say how things are. We are at a loss to work out what the problem is. I have suggested counselling for her or us together, but she is very defensive and parks all the blame on us." Now, it's important to make the point that this piece of correspondence is from the grandmother. We don't hear the daughter's side of the story, nor the grandfather's side of the story, which perhaps might provide us with alternative details. We might not be getting all of the story, and it might be the case, of course, that there is some blame, or all the blame perhaps, in relation to the mother's conduct, and she is the grandmother's conduct, and she is putting forward a particular view of all of these individuals. There might be a very good reason that her daughter has nothing to do with her, and we're not being told it. However, it is pointless for me to speculate upon those aspects. all that is important for me to do is remind you of when we see a situation such as this, we really ought to try and get all of the evidence to understand more about what's really going on. Here, we only have part of it, and therefore we can only deal with what we're being told. So for the purposes of this video, although I point out that it would be advantageous to hear what the other people have to say about it, because it could prove to tell us a different story, we're going to have to proceed on the basis that what we're being told here is correct, and that this individual has told us the truth. On that basis, let's go through the letter again and highlight, on the basis that we accept everything that's in it, as to what might be going on here. My grown-up daughter has a professional job, is married to a lovely man, and has 2 adorable children. She is privately educated, taken around the world, and shown love and support in abundance. She has always, however, found it hard to make friends and communicate and maintain relationships. The difficulty with relationships, and why that is, may show a need to control people in a particular way that they don't like. She's envious of her brother. Envy is a narcissistic trait and has no relationship with him. That might be that he's been shelved or disengaged from by his sister, or he is backed away from her unpleasant behaviours. Whenever we see her, she has these emotional outbursts. This could well be the ignition of fury, mainly directed towards her father over old petty grievances, bringing up the past. She seems intent on punishing us and forgetting all the good things in her childhood: black and white thinking, lack of object constancy. When she was young, we took her to the GP, who referred us to a therapist who asked us why we were letting a child control our lives. This may well be the assertion of control. That didn't help us at all. I'm concerned that despite her upbringing, she's very much like my mother-in-law, and to some extent her father. My mother-in-law was cold, unloving, grateful, reclusive, and not family-orientated at all, potentially a narcissist. My husband also lacks empathy and is very self-absorbed. I wonder if they're on the autism spectrum. I'm parking the suggestion of autism for the purposes of this analysis, but it is something that needs to be considered. And of course, you can observe more about the differences and similarities between narcissism and autism in my video about autism and narcissism, and also the discussions that I had with Harry Thompson. You'll find those in the Ultra interviews. We've been estranged from our daughter for some months. This could be shelving or disengagement, and have not seen our grandchildren. Assertion of control through absent silent treatment, since she came to stay and yet again into a rage with us, potentially ignited fury. After these rages, she will weaponize the children, which is what she has done now. Triangulation. Use of guilt. My husband's health is not good, but she seems incapable of showing him any love or kindness. Absence of emotional empathy. She talks about me supporting her, a sense of entitlement, yet does not even call me to see how things are. We are at a loss to work out what the problem is. I have suggested counselling for her or us together, but she's very defensive and parks all the blame on us. Rejection of threat to control, blame shifting. Now, there does appear to be a number of narcissistic indicators here, and it may well be the case, of course, that the daughter is a narcissist. One would, of course, want to obtain more information from the mother to stress test the efficacy of the evidence that she's providing, and to learn more about the behaviours of the narcissist or suspected narcissist that the daughter is, for the purposes of making an assessment as to what it is that she's dealing with. And the starting point, of course, would be to make an assessment through the narc detector to determine, is the daughter a narcissist or not? If not, then particular options are available to try and resolve the impasse that apparently has been reached. If she is a narcissist, then a different set of actions would need to be adopted in order to resolve the position, at least from the perspective of the grandparents. So the first point is there needs to be a detailed assessment of what this person is dealing with. From the description, one can see, assuming that the information is correct, various narcissistic indicators which would support that the daughter may well be a narcissist, and that has come as a consequence of the genetic predisposition potentially coming from both, coming from the father and then in turn his mother, given the description that the grandmother has been providing as to the family tree. If it's established through a consideration of the evidence that she is a narcissist, then of course there are several issues that arise. The first is what ought to be done. Now, ordinarily, of course, when you learn that you're dealing with a narcissist, the most appropriate response for your sanity is to obey the first golden rule of freedom, which is once you know, you go, you get out, and you stay out. That way, you're not giving fuel to the narcissist. You're not suffering the adverse consequences of being raged at, told that you're a bad mother, ignored, having special occasions missed. You also reduce your emotional thinking if you're an empath, and you reduce the risk of being hoovered. So there are many reasons why you ought not to involve yourself with a narcissist. Of course, in a familial situation such as this, both in terms of, well, she's my daughter and I want to see my grandchildren, it creates considerable emotional pulls. And of course, what becomes difficult is that many people struggle with regard to accepting that they should cut this person out of their life. One route that would be most advantageous would be to reduce the involvement with the daughter to a bare minimum and instead utilize through the son-in-law access to the grandchildren. Now, of course, all of this is dependent upon the extent to which the son-in-law is able to stand up to his wife. And of course, if he's the intimate partner, primary source in the grip of a narcissist, he may well struggle or feel that he can't get in the way of his wife's decisions. Indeed, much as he sympathizes with grandma, he may well feel that his life is not worth living if he challenges his wife. That is a common scenario. There are instances, of course, whereby the grandparents, if they already have an existing good relationship, can take matters legal and get a court order that grants them access, contact with the children. This can sometimes meet with a fruitful outcome that the courts recognise, particularly where there's established relationships between the grandchildren and the grandparents, that those relationships are good for the children and should be maintained, even where there's an estranged situation involving one of the parents and the grandparents. However, of course, it might be the case of being able to obtain it, and the daughter is likely to resist that, and it would cause her, because it would be a threat to control, to cause her to lash out repeatedly. But by accumulating appropriate evidence demonstrating the efficacy of the relationship and explaining why the maintenance of this relationship is important and beneficial to the children, the presentation of such evidence and the likelihood of the narcissist essentially shooting themselves in their foot, applying the principles of give them enough rope, may well mean that the grandparents secure a court order granting them contact/access. Of course, then enforcing it becomes a different issue, and it may well be that the mother would still resist it, and it would then lead to an even more difficult situation. However, that is one of the options that is available. A further option is that unfortunately the grandparents have to write it all off, and for the sake of their own sanity, not being raged at and having the silent treatments, they basically have to accept that the best course of action for them is not to have anything more to do with their daughter, and the collateral consequence of that is that they have nothing to do with the son-in-law and the grandchildren as well. That is, of course, a considerable price to pay, and is something that many people would find unacceptable. But the advantage of doing so is that you get rid of the uncertainty of having to involve yourself with an individual that is capricious, unpleasant, and nasty to you. You no longer have to expose yourself to being raged at. You no longer have to expose yourself to being let down. You no longer have to expose yourself to raised expectations, which are then dashed by the daughter not turning up or cancelling things at the last moment. By writing it all off, then you can get on with your lives. Yes, it is difficult, but logically there is much about it that is sensible. Of course, emotional thinking and the emotional pull of the situation causes many people to think that they're not able to do this. But it is a consideration, and it is something that people who find themselves in a position of alienation as a grandparent need to consider. That however much it feels is hurtful to them, that for their own sanity, they would be better off cutting their losses. Of course, what can be done is to maintain matters from arm's length in terms of sending birthday presents and Christmas presents, and perhaps, where possible, communicating with the grandchildren if they're able to do so through email or telephone, trying as often as they can do so. Understanding, of course, the narcissist may intervene by stopping those communications, but at least it would reduce the extent to which there is exposure to the unpleasant behaviours of the narcissist daughter. I would also direct you to obtain my assistance package, How to Handle a Parental Narcissist, which is just as applicable with what it sets out and explains vis-a-vis dealing with a child who is now an adult who is a narcissist. So it's applicable to a brother or a sister, it's applicable to a son or a daughter, so that you can understand how you can deal with that narcissist in a familial scenario. It gives you a great amount of detail as to the steps that you can take, how you should deal with it, the mindset that should be adopted, and the steps that you can take, either in terms of cutting this individual out of your life and understanding what that means and what goes with it, but also in dealing with other measures whereby you're not prepared to cut that person out of your relationship, and that you wish to maintain some form of relationship, particularly because there are other people within the family unit that you still want to have access to. So I would commend that to you. In the second part of this video, I'm going to move on to talking about the scenario of trying to continue to interact with grandchildren and the steps that should be taken whilst trying to, in effect, handle that narcissist that is your own child or your child-in-law, who makes it difficult for you and has sought to alienate you from the grandchildren. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.